Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Very excited for this event. Can you hear me okay? Is this working? Yeah, great. Okay. So my name is David J. I am the managing partner of Greenberg Trarig's New Jersey office. And I welcome you all on behalf of Greenberg Trarig. Please feel free, keep eating, do what you have to do, but we're going to get started. I want to tell you a quick bit about myself. Much earlier in my career, over 15 years ago, I was a flex-time lawyer. I also, during that period in my career, I joined the New Jersey Women Lawyers Association, and I believe to this day I am still the sole male member of the New Jersey Women Lawyers Association. I joined the organization at that time because issues of diversity, mentoring, work-life balance always spoke to me, and I wanted to try to do my career differently than what I had seen before me. So when Debbie came to me with this idea for this panel, this was obviously an easy sell. My role has changed somewhat in those last 15 to 20 years, and I now find myself in management. I manage an office of about 140 employees, 75 or so of which are attorneys, and I realized that the open letter to law firm partners was actually a letter to me. So I took it very seriously given my own background. And I want to get this issue right during my tenure in that role, and I also realized that good intentions are probably not enough. I assume that many people, in management roles over the last years have also had good intentions. But what we need is aggressive, practical, real-life solutions to what has been a very long-standing problem. So what I hope to gain from today's program are two things. First, the first thing I wanted to accomplish was I wanted to fulfill at least some small part of my obligation by trying to raise awareness of this issue, but even more importantly, I'm hoping to come away from today with some practical suggestions that I and maybe some other people in this room can take back to our own places and help to move the ball forward a little bit. I just want to say a quick thank you to my co-hosts, co-sponsors, Penny Williams, President-elect for the Association of Corporate Counsel, New York City, and Chris Ferrer, my partner, friend, and one of the heads of GT's Women's Initiative. I really appreciate you both putting your power behind this program. And with that, I'm going to get on to introduce our panel. First, our moderator in the middle, Debbie Epstein Henry. Debbie is an expert consultant, best-selling author, and public speaker on careers, workplaces, women in law. She's the founder of DEH Consulting, speaking, writing, in which capacity she consults with and speaks at events for law firms and other companies. Debbie has written 2 best-selling books that have been featured by the New York Times, NBC Nightly News, the Wall Street Journal, and on National Public Radio. She's also the co-founder of Bliss Lawyers. Bliss, little plug for you, Debbie. Bliss Lawyers places high-caliber attorneys to work on temporary engagements in in-house legal departments and law firm clients. Debbie is a native New Yorker. Michelle Coleman Mays, 1, 2 to my right. Michelle is Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary for the New York Public Library. She was previously General Counsel for Allstate Insurance Company and Pitney Bowes. Michelle was also an AUSA in Detroit and in Brooklyn, and in Detroit rose to Chief of the Civil Division. Michelle served on Presidential Commission on Election from 2013 to 2014, and she has more accolades than I could fit into the time that I have to present her here. So, Ernest Greer, one from the end. Ernest is president at Greenberg Trarig. Is previously vice president and managing shareholder of the Atlanta office, where he built that office into a regional powerhouse with over 100 lawyers. Ernest is a highly accomplished business litigator who travels across the country trying cases. and in his spare time, he is widely recognized for his professional and charitable leadership and community involvement supporting education, the arts, public health, and human rights. And I noted just last week, Ernest was recognized as a 2019 Equity Trailblazer by the National Law Journal. Since I joined Greenberg Traurig almost 20 years ago, Ernest has been a friend, a mentor for me, an advocate for me, and I'm actually thrilled to have him here because he always has something interesting to say. Yen Chu, Yen on the end. Hi, Yen. Yen is the Chief Legal Officer of Equinox Holdings, a luxury lifestyle fitness and wellness company with a portfolio that includes Equinox, Equinox Holdings, SoulCycle, Blink Fitness, Pure Yoga, and other entities. Before Equinox, Yen spent over a decade at Ralph Lauren as Senior Vice President, Associate General Counsel, and before that she spent 10 years on the corporate team at Simpson Thacher, so she's seen this issue from both sides and should have an interesting perspective. Yen is also a graduate of Columbia Law School here in New York. Lori Poulos. Lori is the Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Compliance Officer at Transact, a leading provider of marketing, technology, and direct-to-consumer sales for some of the nation's most recognized insurance companies. Lori was integral this year, in the $1.2 billion acquisition of Transact by Willis Towers Watson. And in her spare time, Lori likes to participate in triathlons, and this month completed an Ironman in Atlantic City. Maybe we should call it an Iron Woman. A half Ironman, sorry, yeah. Very impressive. Lori also was involved in the drafting and was a signatory to the open letter to law firms, so she'll have an interesting perspective on that. And Lori is also one of my former mentees, and if given the opportunity today, I am sure she will tell you how badly I screwed that up. I'm so looking forward to hearing what everyone here has to say. I really don't want to take any more of their time, so I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. And with that, here's Debbie.
Thank you so much, David, for the generous introduction and really for hosting this event and for being a friend and colleague and co-conspirator, really, for more than a decade. Really delighted to have the opportunity to collaborate with you and your Greenberg Traurig colleagues, and I'll properly thank everybody at the end. Thanks to all of you for coming today. I know that it was an arduous trip, apparently, with those UN security closings of most streets in New York. I'm impressed that we still have, I think, 150 plus people in the room, so thank you for that. I just want to ask all the panelists to make sure to hold the mic up close so that everybody can hear, and if there's any problem with hearing, just please let us know. Just a few more preliminaries, and then most importantly, we'll get into the topic at hand. Members of the press may be in attendance, so just if you are concerned about your remarks being attributable, just please be aware that you'll be speaking at your discretion. The remarks shared in today's program are attributable to individuals and not to any particular organization. Also, the event is being recorded, and there are people who are going to be doing photography, so please make sure that if you are in the live audience that you're aware of that. The event is also being webcasted internationally. We have about 1,000 people who participate in these quarterly events by webcast, so it's in-house legal departments and law firms and others around the world. Today, we will also encourage people to tweet about the event. The hashtag is hashtag DEH Speaker Series, so please feel free to do that as well. I'll moderate a panel discussion to start, and then we're going to have plenty of time for question and answer, so please be sure to keep questions in mind, and I do know a lot of you, so be forewarned that I could be calling on people as well. So with that, I want to give a little context of how this topic originated and then get into the questions. Most of you will be aware of this, but just again to frame the discussion for today. In December of 2018, there was a LinkedIn post by Paul Weiss that focused and showcased its latest partnership class. There were 12 white individuals featured, one of whom was a woman, the rest were all men. And there was an outrage by this announcement of the firm's partnership class as a result. Later, it was reported that one of the white males is actually of Hispanic descent from Spain, another one is LGBTQ, and there was one woman, so arguably there was 25% diversity, but it wasn't about that. It was really just the latest representation of the dearth of diversity in our profession. It wasn't about Paul Weiss. It was really about our profession across the board, that we're just not representing our population, those who attend law school, those who are in the associate ranks. And it was really the latest call to action as a result. So the New York Times did a watershed article in January of 2019 that many of you probably saw. And what they reported on in that article additionally was this open letter that David referenced, which was at the time 170 general counsel who issued the latest statement saying that we've had enough and that we need our outside law firms to prioritize diversity, and we're going to give more business to those firms that do that. It wasn't an ultimatum, and since that time there are many more GCs who have signed that open letter. But it was definitely the latest iteration of we've had enough. Interestingly, the response has not all been positive to that open letter. Most notably was an op-ed piece by the American Lawyer, that was published in the American Lawyer by a guy named Don Profit. And the title of that was called "A Black Partner Responds to General Counsels on Law Firm Diversity." And what he said there is, a lot of times these open letters are just a public relations scheme, and there's no accountability, and it doesn't help, and sometimes it makes things worse. So we'll talk about all of that. Also, the last chapter on this story before we get into the questions is that this group that now is called the General Counsel for Law Firm Diversity Group, which is led by Michelle Fang, who's the General Counsel of Turo, who led that open letter response. She teamed up, and the general counsels with her have teamed up with Diversity Lab to try to put some teeth to this and put some concrete action steps that can be put into place to really drive the diversity in the profession and really improve the numbers and not just have it be just kind of talk. So with that, I want to start with you, Michelle, and talk to you about this initiative, the open letter response, and this sort of latest iteration of pushing the diversity agenda. It seems to be a broad discussion of diversity. It's really about not just people of color, but women, LGBTQ individuals, and veterans and individuals with disabilities. It's really a broad discussion of diversity. What's the risk in having the discussion be broad? And also, how does intersectionality play into this?
Would you like to start with the easier question?
No, I know who I have with me, Michelle. I'm giving you the hard stuff.
When you start with this question of diversity writ large, which is really what you do when you look at geography, you can look at socioeconomic, and the list just goes on. The problem that can raise is taking your eye off the prize, which is, if you look at the stats, it generally is going to look more like Title VII. Leave out the LGBTQ+, because that wouldn't be covered by Title VII. But it would certainly not necessarily give the focus on gender, ethnicity, and race. And I once had a student of color ask that question, which is, why are we continuing to talk about this, as though I have a great desire to do it most of my life. And I said, run the numbers. And if you run the numbers, you're going to see where the emphasis needs to be. And it's not necessarily on veterans. Could be, but I would doubt it. And so I come back and I say, if you're looking at accountability, it is much harder to hold people accountable when you start talking about gender, ethnicity, and race. And that doesn't mean, Deb, that I want to exclude the other categories, because I did a panel this summer about disabled lawyers. That's a big deal. And this is a woman who tries cases from a wheelchair. And the stories that she can tell you would curl your hair if I had any. And so I come back, and I don't want to exclude them, but I do think there's a need to keep your eye trained on where there's a great deal of need. On intersectionality, I didn't forget the question. Someone will say, well, did this happen to you because you're a woman or because you're Hispanic? And I think the response will generally be, and how would you like me to separate the two? They are intertwined, and it is very difficult unless the setting is more, I guess, trained on something like talking to another male who's Hispanic. Maybe then you could say it's gender. But it is not something that you can immediately dissect. It comes as a package.
So how do you deal with that complexity when you are talking more broadly? When you were just talking about, for example, diversity just with respect to ethnicity, gender, and race, it's still such enormous differences in those various categories. And so how do you distill those complexities? Is there any sort of way to make sure that when you're having the conversation, you're being true to each of the various representative parts?
Deb knows a couple days ago we had a panel made up of women of color and white women. And the question that arose was, well, aren't all Hispanics the same? Well, you would only say that if you didn't know any better, because they're not. And the issue that was being tackled by the panel was that gender bias shows up very differently even among women who are Hispanic, depending on whether you're from Cuba, whether you're from Mexico, whether you're from Central America. So how do you tackle it? Well, perish the thought that you should ask a question. You talk to people because their experiences will enlighten you, much like when I talk to attorneys who are transgender. That's a space, I'm gonna tell you, that I got a blind spot in. I don't sense it as readily as I do the other areas. And the only way I know to educate myself is to have the person talk to me.
And I want to come back to that about how to have open conversations, because so much of the challenge is still that many people feel that there's still a chilling effect and we can't have those honest conversations. So we'll come back to that. I want to turn to you, Lori. David referenced that you were signatory to the open letter. Can you give a little more context to how that letter evolved and really what was the objective, and how has it been received both positively and negatively?
Sure. So I just want to give you a little bit of background about an organization I belong to called the Women General Counsel Network. It's an informal network of female general counsels. We're several hundred people now. And basically, it's this informal support and referral network. We email each other and can ask each other questions about substantive work or referrals for law firms and experts. And so this all started one day with an email from one of the members of that group. She emailed the entire group, and actually I decided that I was going to quote because I thought her words were interesting. So in referring to the article or the announcement by Paul Weiss, which had appeared, I guess, in LinkedIn at the time with their new partnership class, she wrote this. She referenced it and she said, 11 men and 1 woman, all white. Could you imagine if that were the makeup of the entering class? Why is it acceptable at the promotion stage? I plan on sending a note to the diversity coordinator. I imagine that if we spoke as a group, the message would be powerful. And it sort of took off from there. It was very organic. Another woman in the group offered to draft a letter, and she created it in Google Doc, and she sent it around to the group, and everyone jumped on board. I mean, there was this fury of emails, and people were in the Google Doc editing it and signing on to it. And in a matter of days, and telling their friends about it and telling them to sign on, and in a matter of days, we had the 170 signatories. And that's sort of how it took effect. It really was very organic, and the conversation that followed was, you know, what are we going to do from here, and how are we going to put some action into our words? And we just started talking about what's the criteria that there should be for a law firm, and you know, who can recommend the law firms that they use that have the diversity criteria. And many of us, including myself, said, you know, I'm going to reach out to my former law firm and my outside counsel and share the open letter with them, which I did, and that included David. And that's a little bit of how this panel started, actually. I sent him the letter, and he was like, yeah, let's talk about this. And that's how we sort of got here today.
So I want to turn to you, Ernest, and we've talked about the Don Profit letter and how he really was irate about the open letter. Do you feel that his criticism was fair? And what, if so, do you feel that there are other things that should be going on that would be much more effective in moving the needle?
Well, I think, I haven't read the letter in a while, but I think there are 2 points that he makes. One, he says, I'm a named partner of a national employment firm. I've had a stellar career, and no one has ever picked up the phone and called me and said, we want to give you some business, because we know that you're a named partner, you're leading a strong diversity effort. So where is the opportunity that exists? I think the second thing that he's saying, and I think his criticism is valid, I could see the point, which is that the reason that law firms can elevate 11 people, and 10 of them are men and 1 are women, is because the clients allow it to happen. And I always thought that when we became lawyers, we were part of coming up with solutions. And you look out, and this diversity issue has been out here since the late 80s. I mean, there's all kinds of programs, LCLD, and you got the new program out in California. So you got all these programs, but I would say that if you had a lawyer, and in 25 years that lawyer hasn't figured out a solution, you would have fired that lawyer. So I just think, quite frankly, that what is at play here is a couple of things. General counsel could really care about diversity, but they have a board and a CEO to report to who may not care about it as much. The other thing that we lose sight of is that the practice of law creates individual close relationships. And so when you say to a law firm, you're not going to get my work if you don't become more diverse, 9 out of 10 times you're saying that to somebody who has become sort of part of your family, someone who you've depended upon, someone who has covered your back. So you're essentially taking work from somebody, not the firm, but from the individual. So all that is to say is that I understand what Don was saying. I've known Don for many years. It was shocking to me that he has never gotten a call to get some work. But I also understand the complexities of the issues.
So your remarks to me speak to 2 issues. One is courage and the other is power. And Yen, I want to put this question to you. The courageous piece is to what Ernest said, which is you have to be willing as an in-house lawyer to move the business, take it away from friends or rock the boat, do something different. But the other piece of your message, Ernest, to me is about power, which is, do you have the leverage to do that? You yourself are perhaps reporting to a board or a CEO, and so we all presume, and we purposely had general counsel represented today, to presume the power is there, but it may not always be there. And so I want to be thoughtful about what is the GC perspective on this?
I think when you speak about power and the role of the GC in terms of the relationship with the business, there are several layers. I don't think it's necessarily about just, do you have the power to persuade your CEO or your board to move away from a certain individual? There is also institutional knowledge, right? So as a GC, sometimes my life is easier if someone knows something. That doesn't mean that I will never move away from a certain law firm or a certain lawyer, but today this person really helps me. If you screw up, guess what? I might want to be looking outside the box for other lawyers. I also think it's not necessarily a zero-sum game. I think that in today's world, I remember maybe 10 years ago, privacy was not something that was on people's radar. So I walk into a company and I say, who's your privacy lawyer? Who have you guys engaged? And they're like, good question. We've been using our IP lawyer for this, or our general, whatever it is. And I say, well, there are niche groups here. We should probably start looking at this. And there's an opportunity right there. It's not necessarily, so there's always opportunity in different places. We're actually very fortunate because the business world is changing. Innovation has forced companies to be constantly changing, and that we're so fortunate as a profession to constantly be employed because of that, right? There's always new issues. So there are new areas. So the power to change something is there, but also the power to add and supplement is huge.
And I think we'll come back to that because I think there's a lot of tension around this issue. A lot of people think it is about scarcity and this is a zero-sum game. And as competition increases, that it's getting that much harder. So we'll come back to that. But I want to first come back to you, Michelle, And you referenced this event that we recently attended where, and Michelle is the former chair of the ABA Commission on Women, and she spearheaded this report and study that she referenced, which is really about bridging the gap among women of color and white women. And so the launch of the study, even though the written part is not out yet, was earlier this month, where Anna DeVere Smith was presenting actually and sort of acting out some of the findings of the report, and then some highlights of the report were given. So can you share some of those recommendations? What I really want to focus on now is overcoming some of these diversity challenges, and let's start with women of color and white women.
What I had said when we did this a week or so ago was that this whole topic was somewhat underground, and that was not meant to be a plus. That people would, generally women of color, would have very strong sentiments about how they felt about white women in their organization, but they would only express those sentiments to other people that looked like them. And I said, well, that's not going to do much good last time I checked. And when I commissioned the study, Erin Reeves actually did the focus groups. The focus groups are broken down by the ethnicity or racial makeup of a particular group. So it was all women who were Hispanic, all women that were Asian, you get the drill. And at the end of the study, there were a group of findings that were published, and they're not that long. Let me just highlight a couple of them, and one of them I've already spoken about, Deb, which is that women of color want white women to know that our experiences differ from yours. But please also recognize there is a lot of diversity among women of color. Combining gender with race and ethnicity makes the gender experience very different for us. We don't always experience being a woman in the same way that you do. And then I'll just end with the last one for the women of color. We want to have conversations, but don't rely on us to start every conversation on race and ethnicity. The burden on us to start these conversations makes it harder for us to have the conversations.
But you also talked in that study about how do you respond to those very honest declarations that were developed through those focus groups. Share a little bit about what those recommendations are.
One of my favorite ones, and this is so hard given how polarized this country has become, and it said, if you start the conversation, do not assume you have to agree or disagree. You have to just understand. And if you think about that, that is very hard to do because most lawyers think they got to pick a side. Am I against or am I for? How am I supposed to go straight down the middle? And yet, it would be a huge step forward if you simply said, I'm going to listen, and I talked about listening and talking to, I'm going to listen to your experience, and I don't have to say whether I agree with it, but I can now say, I can articulate what your experience has been. So that was one of my favorite. I don't have all of them. You want me to find the others? You have to go to somebody else.
I'm not going to give you homework up here. It's okay.
Thank you.
But we've talked offline about this, Michelle, and I think one reference that I think is really powerful is if you haven't read Vernee Meyer's book yet called What If I Say the Wrong Thing, I highly commend it. And I think it plays into these recommendations, not just the one you mentioned, but others, that a lot of us are afraid to start those conversations, or a lot of us feel judged if we say the wrong thing. And I think what the other piece of this, which I find so important, is to make sure the environments in which we work are places where we can make those mistakes, because we will, because we haven't had those experiences. And I think that's one of the things that really has to be pushed with this new effort, is to create environments that are not judgmental in that regard. So the
dog didn't eat my homework, so I found the other few recommendations.
I had a feeling you would.
I know. It says commit to engaging in dialogue and be comfortable with a little bit of discomfort. I told you about the dialogue to understand. Build trust, and this is the one I struggle with. Build trust in other ways before delving into these dialogues. Organize structured dialogues. And then the last one, use films, books, and other arts and entertainment options to have the dialogue. So those were the 5.
So, yeah, and I want to turn to you and ask if you had any particular reactions to what Michelle just relayed, and particularly, just again, with this a different vantage point as a woman of color, and what rang true to you about what she summarized, and what didn't resonate as much.
I think that understanding is key. You hear this over and over again. We all listen to respond and not listen to listen. And in this Insta world that we're in, we're always just responding. We're either gonna like your photo or gonna whatever it is. And so I do think really listening is tough. Because somebody, especially as lawyers, we are expected to respond. I think also that really having that hard conversation is tough. I think that it's the thing I've learned most just in general as a lawyer is, and where I feel like I've learned in my 20 plus years, is just being uncomfortable is growing. And that is so hard because as lawyers, we are either right or we're wrong. We're either this or we're that. And I think that being uncomfortable, constantly being uncomfortable, is tough. I think if we go back to intersectionality, that conversation, I'm a visual person, so I see that obviously as that Venn diagram that we all think of. And then I have teenagers, so I think of emojis, and I think of like different people of emojis, and Professor Crenshaw actually said, right, don't let intersectionality be, we throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, it's complicated, so sorry. And so I think of that emoji where we're all like, or whatever it is, and I think that prohibits the conversation from going forward. I think if we all throw up our hands and say, oh, it's so hard, I can't deal with this today, I think that is really tough.
Ernest, Yen brought up before this issue about a zero-sum game, and I wonder what your thoughts are on it, because I see that a lot of the challenges around diversity are about this scarcity notion that there are only a certain number of spots, and women and diverse talent, they're competing over them, and it's pitting one group against the others. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's true, but I'm looking at it in the context of a couple of different contexts. One is getting work from a corporation, and then I look at it from the context of having positions in a company or a law firm. And I think a couple of things are happening. I remember back in the 90s when they did articles on boards, who are on a board, they did it focused on diversity. If you go and Google, you will see in the last 10 years when there's an article about board seats, it's about women being on boards, okay? The reality is, and I'm really going to what you're saying in terms of pitting one against another, I would much prefer that article to read, those stories to read, do these boards have diverse people? Not just, are there women, right? The other thing we've got to understand is that the reason that people feel challenged is because when decisions are being made in the room, no one looks like them. And that's a big challenge. And I will tell you, one of the things that I've said is that what I fear is happening is that this whole diversity thing is leading to a situation where they're pitting diverse people against one another based upon that zero-sum game.
So it's interesting because there's certainly people who see it differently, and they think, there's power in numbers, and we really have momentum here. And we can also have enormous inspiration from diverse groups that have had success. For example, like the gay, the gay movement in terms of gay marriage and things like that has been enormously successful. And so can't other diverse groups be inspired by that? So I'm just curious, Michelle, we've talked about this before, if you have a counterpoint on this in terms of the scarcity concern and the zero-sum notion.
I saw a sign in one of the women's marches when you were talking about social justice, and it said, it ain't pie. You get a larger slice, I get none. That you really are talking about developing cultures. And that is so important because it determines, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't have a culture that's inclusive or one that can withstand disagreement, and so go to the boardroom. That's where a lot of that should take place. If you're talking about risk management, you ought to want to make sure that you are not tunnel vision. So to me, the more I've got different points of view in that room, it's less likely that I'm going to think, it's all about this company, we're doing wonderful, only because you can't see what you can't see. And so when I come back and I hear Ernest saying that maybe we're pitting folks against one another, I don't think we have enough to pit anybody against anybody. Because I once again go to the numbers and I say, show me the numbers about where there's a real, noticeable increase in women on boards and even minorities on boards. And I'm going to say to you, not really. There are still IPOs that have taken place recently where not one person of color or any women were on the board. And you're going to say we're going to celebrate or be concerned that we're pitting? I think there's enough there where we can still join hands to get there. And I'll shut up for now.
No, I think, it's interesting. I think part of what is behind a lot of this is because there's a lot of discussion about these diversity efforts really not having teeth. So coming back again to this open letter, one of the real criticisms of it is there was no mention in that open letter that, now we're going to actually move business and we're going to take away business, or we're going to actually hire those diverse lawyers to do our bet the company work. So Lori, I'm curious with, just with your experience in co-authoring that open letter, how do you respond to that? Again, Michelle, the author, the original author and the spearheader of the letter, says there's room for everyone. What's your take on it?
So when the letter first was created, there wasn't a plan of how it would, go from there. We're just reacting to some news, and this wasn't new for us. I mean, the frustration for us is that, the same as here. There's been talk about needing diversity for decades now, and yet the numbers aren't moving. And so what's the real issue? How do we fix it, right? So our reaction was, we're going to speak up and make this call to action, but we don't necessarily have the solutions, right? So like I said, it was a very organic process, and we didn't really think about, once the letter was out there, exactly what the next moves were going to be. We were sort of going to see what kind of reaction there was and go from there. And I think that the op-ed piece by Don Profit, sort of called us out on that. Just talking about it isn't enough, and according to him, might even do more harm than good. And I sort of had a visceral reaction to that when I first read it, because I thought, how dare he? I'm trying to do something good here. And and one of the things he said is, you don't really mean what you're saying. And of course I mean it. I mean, this affects me too as a woman, and so I did what I thought can help and speak up. And I think what we're trying to do is not necessarily punish the firms that aren't showing diversity, but get them to see that they need to change. And so taking away business, even though that's sort of what we're saying, we're going to do that if you don't increase your diversity. I think that really the thinking was, if we say that, hopefully they'll change, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that Don talked about in his piece was, this is not the first rodeo here, that there's been the statement of principles and the call to action, and there's been the ABA Resolution 113 and all other iterations and efforts. So I do want to turn to solutions, because I think what Don wrote in his piece was about diversity fatigue, and I think many of us who've been steeped in these issues for years share in that frustration. So let's talk about some solutions. Let's put some ideas out there, and then I want to open up to questions from the audience. I want to start again with you, Michelle, on solutions. again, when you were chair of the ABA Commission on Women, you spearheaded a different study, the bias interrupters study, in a partnership with MCCA as well as the Center for Work-Life Law. Can you talk about what bias interrupters are and give some specific examples that you think are effective in addressing some of the challenges we've been exploring?
So this is a study which you can get online if you're a member of the ABA. It's easy. You can't change what you can't see. And that was going more to the implicit bias that people are so wrapped up in believing they're a meritocracy, that everything here is done well, this is a firm that everyone can win as long as they have the right skill set, and everybody knows that's a bunch of hogwash. And so the study was meant to focus on systemic change. Not that you don't all have work you need to do. As long as you're breathing, you probably got stuff you need to work on. But there is only so much an individual can do to change deeply seated beliefs about who's competent, who isn't, who looks like a leader, who doesn't, who's docile, who's a real go-getter, you know, all the words that show up in performance evaluations. And so what this study did is to say organizations, law firms, and in-house counsel, so in-house counsel are not off the hot seat just because they're the clients. They've got their own work to do as well. You need to look at talent management systems. That's hiring, promotion, compensation, succession planning, assignments. It's how you manage people. And look at whether your culture, your organization has bias built in that you have not dealt with. And what they then did are toolkits at the very back for each of these systems, you know, hiring, talent management, all the way around. And you look at whether, when you do the analysis of your organization, how is the bias showing up? Do you have any parents who are partners, any women who are partners? Where is it that your organization is giving the short end of the stick to people? So take compensation. In a law firm, we would say, all right, how do you handle origination credit? That's just an example. That's a third rail in most law firms. How do you handle whether or not someone is assigned to certain tasks within the compensation? That is, are they going to be given menial tasks, or are they going to be given, we call it glamour work and housework? And for women, we all know what that's like. So all of these systems have things you can do to interrupt bias, but it's at the systemic level. It doesn't depend on a law firm's individual partner to go hand-to-hand combat.
And part of that was responsive to the initial reaction, which was like, oh, we just have to train women and people of color to be better and do better.
Right, they've got to be rainmakers. Oh my God, if you take a rainmaking class, surely you'll make partner next year. It must
I
be
teach
you.
those classes, so just be careful.
I don't care. You cannot train your way out of bias. That's all I'm going to say.
It's true. So it's interesting. The latest iteration I mentioned, Yen, is that Michelle Fang is now, in her group, is partnering up with Diversity Lab to try to use some really concrete tips and procedures to try to really move the needle. And so, you know, whether it's collecting metrics from outside law firms or partnering with law firms on different types of diversity initiatives, all different sorts of tracking. Have you looked into that? Do you feel that those are things that are going to make an impact?
I do, but first I want to make sure I don't step on any other classes that you're going to teach.
There's a long list.
Yeah, so yeah, I do, and I think over the weekend some of you saw the Move the Needle Fund article and really spelling out some of what concretely what are we going to do with X amount of money with this many firms and what they're going to do with that. And part of that, a lot of that is the metrics, right? I mean, you hear Michelle say it, and I completely, data matters. Data matters because I think the thing you learn in every unconscious bias training class or whatever it is be careful about fit, because fit doesn't look at data. Fit is just basically, what's it feel like? What's this relationship? And so it tends to perpetuate the same situation. Data matters, metrics are important, but I think also committing to something and saying that I'm going to publicly disclose this matters. I think I was a securities lawyer by trade, and so I think a lot of it, I think of like a public company. Public company has to say certain things, and slowly you start to see a change in behavior. If you have to say it to your investors, what are you going to say? And then all of a sudden other stakeholders start getting interested. So then you kind of go into, like, for example, corporate social responsibility. I would say, you know, many, many years ago, that was, oh, sure, that's a nice too. Today, that is part of the bread and butter for a lot of companies, and part of that is metrics, data. Stakeholders coming at different angles, whether it be your investor, but also your consumer cares now, and also your employees care, and all of a sudden, you know, it's coming at, it used to be, oh, well, you know, it was a public interest group that cared, and I mean, they had a niche interest in this. Now all of a sudden it's coming at different angles, and companies start caring about those things. I think that if that analogy plays out with this, if we hit these concerns in different areas as different stakeholders, the metrics are going to start showing certain things. And so I think as you kind of go through, so I think one of them was just collecting outside counsel metric. Who's done what how many women have been promoted, how many African Americans have been promoted, et cetera. You start to see a pattern as you collect the information. One of the other things they say in the fund was, you know, partnering with law firms, and what do you do in terms of giving advocacy and feedback and whatnot. And I think we've all talked in big pictures, but I've been doing some of this. I didn't know I was doing it. I had just very recently, an example is I had an attorney go on maternity leave, and so I got a secondee come into my office, and she was amazing. She worked so hard, it was really fantastic, and then she went back to the firm. She's up for partner. I made sure that the relationship partner, who is female, and the relationship partner on both the East Coast and the West Coast, both female, knew that their relationship with my firm or with my company depended on a lot of her, because she was inside my four walls. She knows my company better than they do. She knows how the executives like information. She knows how certain things get done, who gets certain things done. She knows how to be really efficient. And so I made sure when she went back that when I give business to that firm now, I actually not only copy the two relationship partners, but I copy the executive committee partner. And so I think it is that relationship that you do. I wasn't doing it and, you know, oh, I need to, but here's somebody who really showed so much promise, was really bright, and when she is put in the pool this fall with I don't know how many men, I don't know how many whatever, I want to do as much as I can to make sure that the feedback is getting to the right people.
And I think that can make all the difference in that woman's career, and also just in the management of a firm in terms of their perception that, oh, clients are doing this more. But interestingly, when I talk to law firm management, sometimes they feel like clients have gone a little too far and they're meddling a bit, particularly on the subject of origination credit. And really, should clients be asking, who's getting origination credit for this matter? So I just wonder, Ernest, have you come across this, and what are your thoughts on this? Is there a line that clients really shouldn't cross?
Yeah, I think there's a line that clients shouldn't cross. I mean, because the client wouldn't, in the reverse, want us to cross their lines. But yeah, we get questions about origination credit. I mean, that happens all the time. Fortunately for us, anyone who feels that they are entitled to origination credit, they can, as a matter of right, put their name in there. And then at the end of the year, there's a discussion amongst people who are doing that compensation. And so we get to avoid that fight. But here's what I want to talk about the tracking thing. And I've seen this in our firm. You know, the reality is that when you look at firms, you have to understand that the associate really becomes extremely meaningful at about the third year, right? And so you have the lateral market, you have the summer market, and then of course you have the partner market. What we do is that we track for summer associates how many minorities we interview, which offices they ended up going to. We track when we laterally hire somebody, we very responsibly insist upon a diverse pool. When people come up for partner, we consider the entire platform in a way that allows that we have a diverse environment. And what am I saying? I'm saying that this diversity issue is a little more quiet than what it should be because the environments are not created where people can have a full and robust conversation. You know, when I became president of the firm 3.5 years ago, they put diversity under my responsibilities. And I said, I don't want to do diversity. And the reason I didn't want to do diversity is because I didn't want any of my partners to feel that I was taking a position solely because of my being diverse. And I didn't want partners to feel when I talk about the importance of diversity to our clients that I'm doing that for my best, in my best interest. The reality is this. I'm hoping, and I feel that women are galvanized better than ever. And I actually applaud it. And the reason that I made the comment about pitting one against the other, Michelle, was because as a Black American, I want to jump on that train. Because what I know—
There's enough room for you. Go ahead.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I'm deliberately sitting between the two of them, believe me.
I don't want corporations or law firms to believe that this diversity issue is an issue that can be solved if we retain and promote women, okay? It is much larger than that. And so I just wanted to clean up what I was saying.
Okay, we figured it out then. We're all set, right? I think importantly, there's a number of things you said, Ernest. I want to open up to questions. Just one final comment that you said before that you have a mechanism in place on the subject of origination, that anybody who feels that they originate a client, they can speak to that and they can do that. It comes back to Michelle's point that there has to be systemic change on compensation and all these other iterations. But even if the mechanism in place is there in place, which is admirable that it is, it doesn't mean that people will feel comfortable exercising it, number one. And number two, even if they get up the courage to exercise it, it doesn't mean they'll be received in fairness. And part of coming back to you actually as a leader, and I understand your reticence to take on the diversity role, but part of it is that, yeah. But I do think part of it is that, you know, we as leaders are partial, of course, to those who look like us. That's supported by the research. And so unless you're in that role, making hopefully other people feel more comfortable, it may not happen. It's a multifaceted issue. I want to open it up to questions. Please make sure that you use the mics that are being passed around. We have it so that we have it on the recording. Who'd like to start? And just say, if you're comfortable, Louise, say your name and affiliation. If not, of course, we can go neutral.
Louise Firestone. I'm with LVMH, Moet Hennessy, Louis Vuitton. I'm the General Counsel for North America. Sorry. None of you mentioned the pipeline issue. And I've had the conversation with a number of the relationship partners at the firms that I work with, and I have been told we want to do the right thing, we're trying to do the right thing, but we lose women and other diverse people along the way. And so when it is time for partnership, we've often lost the best people or the best diverse candidates before the partnership opportunity comes along. Is that just to placate me, or is there real truth to that?
I think you're going to take that one, Ernest.
That situation does happen. The one thing we have to understand is that when you have a corporation, you have a CEO model, you send out memos, this is where we're going, we're changing our insurance and things of that sort. In a law firm, you really have a gathering of about 400, 500 different businesses, depending upon the size. And I will say that the fact of the matter is that some people are just buttholes. And that is what it is.
Did you say what I thought you said? Okay, just want to make sure.
And you know, because they're buttholes, they create an environment in which people don't want to remain. And so the challenge is just creating an environment that is comfortable for diverse people. I recall when I joined the firm many years ago, I was the first black person in the firm. There were no black secretaries, there were no black folks in the finance department, et cetera. And I went to the managing partner and said, hey, we need to get some diverse people around here. And he said, okay, well, we're looking. And then he came to me about 2 months later and said, hey, Ernest, oh, you're an apology. You're not just talking about lawyers, you're talking about people. And so what happens, I think, in a lot of the big firms, they're not as focused on diversity as it relates to staffing. They don't understand and appreciate that even if I'm a lawyer, if I look out and I see diverse people in the environment, then I know that the environment is tolerant of me. Okay? If I don't see diverse people in the environment, then I feel some kind of way. I don't feel comfortable. So that's...
And I think the excuse of, well, we can't find those people is, of course, ask the people who you want to bring on. So those networks become part of the larger network. It really has to be that the individuals who are diverse are able to be ambassadors and really bring in people so that it is more of a mutual community and it's not one that's isolated. Yen?
Can I ask, Louise, when you had that conversation with the law firm, did the law firms say why? Did they ask on their exit interview, is it because most women leave for parenting, or people feel isolated, or whatever it is? Because I think that's part of I don't expect any law firm to snap their fingers and fix this, but if the law firm's not even asking the question, then I know they're not in the game.
Yes, I mean, I have asked that question, and the typical answer that I've received is that women and other diverse associates tend to be snapped up by their in-house clients very quickly.
So of course, and Chris has a question here, so if you could just share the mic with Chris. So of course, the legal departments have figured it out because they've snapped up all that diverse talent and they're all at the highest ranks of all of the companies in
Guilty
our
as
country.
charged.
Is that right? So glad we just figured that out.
Hi, I'm Chris Fair from Greenberg Traurig, and I actually have more of a comment in response than a question, because I do a lot of training on implicit bias, and I use a lot of studies and research, and as Michelle knows, because I think some of this was in the ABA study on this matter, there are equal numbers or even more women, and I can speak to this more from the gender perspective because that's what my training has focused on. There are more women in law school than men. There are equal numbers of women at the junior ranks, and we do see a fall off as people get to the higher ranks. That's true, and all of the firms I know are fighting to address that. But there are also some other statistics that I think explain it. One of which is that women still tend to earn 20% less than their male peers in the law. And one of them is that women are far less likely to make partner in a law firm after they've had children, while men are more likely to make partner after having children because the studies say they're perceived as breadwinners and people who need to support their families. So in my training, one of the things I talk about is how if you want to keep women in the practice of law, you need to address those systemic issues and you need to remove the implicit bias that's impacting them, because who the heck wants to stay if you feel like your male peers have a much better chance than you of making partner, or you feel like your male peers are making much more money than you are and are going to continue to.
Thank you for that comment. And I think what it also taps into, if we could pass the mic over to the right, Michelle, if you would just, and here next, Michelle, if you could just respond to that, because I think the other piece underlying Chris's remarks, of course, is around isolation. And if you don't have a sponsor who's a power broker who's really willing to back that junior lawyer, that lawyer is going to be gone. And of course, the research around sponsorship shows that we sponsor those who look like us. So how do you address that?
I think that goes, because that's, again, in the bias interrupter study, when it looks at who gets the sponsors, who inherits business, because I once saw a partner, he had inherited the business at Allstate. The business existed before he was born, so I said, I know you didn't bring it in. And so when you look at who is being invested in that individual that says, I'm going to take a risk on you, I think you're smart, I'm going to give you the support, and I want to see you succeed. If you don't see that, why am I going to do my blood, sweat, and tears here? I'm not that stupid.
So you didn't give me the answer, though, how we get that happening.
It's in the study. I'm not going to be redundant.
Yes.
Herminie Simonetta, General Counsel for Coty Professional Beauty Division. Diversity is very high on the agenda of our legal department. And what we are doing is we're trying to push our firms to explain to us what kind of diversity programs they have. But I'm seeing a tension between we're trying to push them to do this and how much will they be doing this because they truly believe, or how much are they doing this because they have a commercial interest? And is that really going to lead to something, or is it better than nothing?
I think it's an important issue, Lori. I want you to take this, really. Does it matter that the law firms really care, or is it enough that they are just feeling compelled to comply and start improving their diversity?
So I think if you really care, you're probably going to be more passionate about it and make something happen. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure it matters if you're what is driving you. And I think that's also part of why in-house counsel are taking that active role to say, maybe you don't care about this issue, but you'll care when I make it an economic thing. And so we're just trying to get action and turn things around. And so I don't know that it necessarily matters, but if someone doesn't care and you can get them to care by giving them a different incentive, I don't think that there's a problem with that.
I think we have a question over here, but another incentive that we haven't mentioned, which I think is very powerful, is competition as an instrument of change. It's why I co-initiated the Best Law Firms for Women initiative, and the idea was, can we make law firms compete on women's issues as they historically have done on pro bono or compensation or any other factor? And it's a real driver. So I think it's better if they care, but if you can't get them to care, at least have them really motivated from the economic perspective. Over here.
Hi, my name is Tony Maroney. I am Chief of Staff to General Counsel at Standard Chartered Bank. I've been working in the D&I space for about 25 years now, which is kind of incredible. I know I don't look that old. My question kind of focuses on this pipeline issue still, and I keep coming back to it because in my mind, thinking about operations is about root cause analysis, right? We're talking pipelines, and as a lawyer in the legal profession, we can only promote those that are already in the pipeline. If we don't have students going to law school that are diverse, we don't have a broad enough base to draw from. If we don't have students at university that are diverse enough. I'm thinking of your question of like throwing your hands up and saying our education system's broken. We can talk about equality and we can talk about equity. And I think they're two principles very fundamental to the legal profession. When we talk about equity, are we creating a balanced enough level playing field from get-go? Let's not talk about affirmative action. Are we creating a balanced platform for everybody to be successful to even be in the pipeline?
Yeah, and I know you've done some work at Columbia, and so why don't you start with us?
So I think Debbie and I were talking in general about like strategies for isolation, and one of the things I said to her is I actually, and I think a lot of people do this, but one of the concrete examples I had was I will go back to Columbia and I work with first generation law students. We do a workshop. There is a woman who is on the Columbia Law School board with me who is an executive coach. And then there's a law firm partner. And so the three of us, and then there's a woman at the Department of Justice. And so the four of us basically will take this at different angles. And we sit there and we talk to first generation law students because studies show that most of those are your diverse candidates, right? Most of those are individuals who this is, my family has never done this, I'm here, I don't know how to act. I don't know how to respond. What should I be saying? What should I be wearing? How do I hide my parents' criminal past? Whatever it is, I mean, and that was a very real example. Or how do I do these types of things? So to talk about root cause analysis, I would say that is part of it. Is that alone? I'm one person. I can go and I can talk to a room full of first-generation law students. I can go and talk to empowering women of color groups. I can go and talk to those individuals. A lot of it is also peer-to-peer. And sometimes I think it is really just listening and hearing and helping and saying, you know, this is what I did when I was in that situation, or this is what, you know, no, you shouldn't wear jeans to that meeting, or whatever it is.
It's got to be happening on so many levels, and we've got to be hitting it at every aspect.
Yeah, let me
Jay?
just share
Yes.
with you. There was an intern that came to work at the library this summer. It's a woman of color came to work at the library, Stanford, first year. She was fabulous. And at the end, I always meet with the students and talk to them, and then she wrote me this note. And it was almost disheartening to hear. She said, when I came here in June, she says, I was thinking about dropping out of law school. She said, but as a result of being here for the last 3 months, I'm now ready to go back and conquer. But I don't know what happened to her in law school, but she felt totally diminished. And that is what happens in law firms. People feel diminished. And that goes to culture. I keep coming back to the C word. It is so critical. So if you've got a butthole, the question you've got to ask is that the culture you want to convey?
But I want to, Jay, come to you in a moment, but just can you elucidate a little bit more around culture? Because it seems like this very amorphous thing. How do you create a culture that is actually has both, you know, D&I but also the equity piece?
First of all, it takes it only takes a day to destroy culture. That's the sad part. You've seen these companies crumble overnight when they've done something really horrendous. Look at Harvey Weinstein. That's like it took a blink of an eye. But to build it takes a community of people. That's why it just can't be you, Deb, or it can't be Yen or Lori. It's got to be people who are convinced that the message you're sending is this is how we want to treat people, even those we disagree with. And that goes from everything to the systems you put in place, including to handle disgruntled employees. Let me repeat that. Because I always have said employees are your biggest asset until they can become your biggest ass. So you have got to treat...
There's a theme going on here.
That was in honor of Ernest. And so what
Thank you.
So what I want to emphasize is that there's so many things that go into culture. It's not just one thing.
I think the other piece of this is about modeling behavior. It's not just these, you know, these structures that are in place and how we individually train people, but really that the leaders actually exemplify the behavior that is supposed to be part of this message. Jay.
Thank you. Jay Benegal from Citizens Bank. I haven't been involved in diversity and inclusion nearly as long as the gentleman from Standard Chartered, but I did have a question about staying on the subject of pipeline. In 2008, ORIC created 2 tracks, a non-partner track and a partner track. And the reason they did that was in an effort to keep associates on staff, but pay them less and, you know, not lay off as many associates as their peer firms did. They honed in on something, that not everybody wants that brass ring, right? Not everybody wants to be an equity partner. So to your point that 50% of law school graduates are women, and first-year associate on to, let's say, third, fourth-year associates, still a healthy representation of women, and then the thin-out occurs. Have you given any thought to the fact that women don't want to be in leadership? It's not part of their career path. Also, they may feel that they don't have the requisite skill set to be leadership.
Can I just modify that question slightly as an advocate for women? I think it's important, and I know you, Jay, well, so I know, you know, just to broaden this, it's really that the brass ring for partnership is not something that many people aspire to in the same way that they did before. Maybe it's millennials who are looking to build their lives differently. Sometimes it's women who want to play a more integral role in their kids' lives. Sometimes it's men who want to do that. It's all sorts of reasons. But the idea is really, how come we haven't at law firms created a coveted track that isn't the equity track. I hope you don't mind that tweak.
Oh,
That's
for
for
me?
you, Ernest, yes.
Well, I mean, I've only been a partner in one law firm, and that's Greenberg Traurig, and we don't have an up and out system. First of all, you don't have to be a full-time employee to make partner, so we don't have that. Also, some people make partner in 10 years, some people make partner in 15 years, but just because they're not a partner, they doesn't mean that they have to go. And I will tell you, I'm glad you brought in the question, because I will tell you, in the last couple of years, I've seen a number of people, white males, who I know are not going to stay around long enough to be a partner because they've made the decision, at least at this time in their life, that they don't want to have to work 60 hours a week, that there's something better. So their main focus, it's funny, is getting their loans paid off. You know, they want to pay those loans out in 5 years. So, you know, I think the other firms, though, that do have those tracks, it's a traditional equity partnership, and every point in the partnership has a certain dollar value profit associated to it. And it's hard getting away from that model. But I do think you see a lot of firms, maybe not a lot that are based in New York, but I think across the country you're seeing more firms go to equity and non-equity partnerships.
Other questions? Have we solved this? Okay, what I'd like to do then to wrap it up is I want to turn to our panelists one more time and ask for a parting message. And what I'd like you to do is ideally give everybody in this room and everybody listening by the recording one action step that they can start doing tomorrow or today to move the needle, to do something different, to, as David started with, really to do something better here so that we can not just be in the same place having this same conversation next year. I'll start with you, Yen.
I would say be vigilant. Be vigilant when you're listening, be vigilant when you're questioning. We're lawyers, we're always questioning the facts. So question the invoice. As a general counsel, I question the invoice. Is it the same people working on my case or my deal as the people who showed up for the pitch? Be vigilant about feedback. Be vigilant when I'm listening to people for intersectionality, and so that I am actually really listening and saying, oh, your experience isn't exactly like mine just because you happen to be an Asian woman too.
Great. Ernest?
And I would say that as a general counsel, don't focus so much on what the percentage of minorities who worked on the file is. Focus on, while looking at that, focus on whether they're being retained. Because what I see in law firms is just a revolving door. We had 5 blacks, you know, last year, we have 5 blacks this year, but the other 5 are gone and they're new, and so it's just a revolving door. Really focus on the retention issue.
Great. Michelle?
I want folks to look, as Yen said, look for the data. Like, convince people not to go by their gut, but to actually do the work to figure out where the biggest value can be delivered based on your particular environment. You can work with your HR people. You don't have to rip your systems out to do this, but you have to be curious enough and dogged enough to say, I want to see what the facts say.
Lori?
So my advice is to law firm leaders, and like Yen said about questioning things, I would ask that law firm leaders question themselves and have self-awareness when they make decisions, hiring decisions, assignment decisions, and always question what decision you're making, what motivated it, and whether there is some subconscious bias.
Great, and what I would add is that for those of us in this room and listening, we're often the ones who actually are more attuned to these issues and more knowledgeable. And we need to embrace the diversity within ourselves. We all carry those biases, and we carry those judgments. And those judgments and those criticisms are impeding our ability to be successful here. And part of what we're doing is we alienate each other, even when you've already got somebody who's on board and you can alienate them. So I really want to encourage people to try to check themselves, to embrace that diversity within themselves. I have a few announcements, and if you just hold your applause, I have a number of people I want to thank, and then I have a couple announcements of our next few events, which I'm incredibly excited about. First, our distinguished panel, Yen and Ernest and Michelle and Lori, thank you so much. I want to again thank Greenberg Traurig, who's been absolutely a pleasure to work with. In particular, Ernest and David, you are the one who made this all happen. Thank you so much. Chris Ferrer, thank you. And Teresa McCahill and Trang Cottrell, thank you for all of your work in working with my assistant, Renee Green. You guys were fabulous. I want to thank ACC New York City that also co-sponsored this event, specifically Penny Williams, Kevin Fumai, and Suzanne Cruz. And I also want to mention Suzanne is here, right here. Raise your hand. Thank you. And she is here to answer any questions for those of you who are in-house who want to join ACC. They've got great CLEs and great events, and in fact, they have one on diversity and intersectionality that is coming up October 15th, and you can be a guest of the board if you talk to Suzanne, if you're an in-house lawyer and you're thinking about joining ACC. So these events are quarterly for those of you who've not attended or participated before. They're hosted by all the large law firms in New York. And I usually do 3 events a year that are fireside chats with TED speakers or New York Times bestselling authors, and then I do 1 legal industry panel a year. So my next event is January 8th from 8 to 10 a.m., where I'll do a fireside chat with Dolly Chugg on the psychology of good people. If you haven't heard of Dolly, check out her TED Talk, and she's really interesting. March 4th from 8 to 10 a.m. is my next event after that, where I'll do a fireside chat with Jill Schlesinger. She's the financial commentator, on CBS. She has a show, Jill on Money, and she just came out with a book as well. So with that, thank you so much for listening. Please get in touch if you have other ideas about speakers or events, and thank you again for all your participation. Thanks.